She'd made it 47 seconds past the boundary. 47 seconds of freedom before his power cut through the darkness like a predator's jaw snapping shut. When Kieran's arms pinned her against the ancient oak, his breath hot against her neck and his voice a lethal whisper in her ear, Lyra realized the most terrifying thing about alphas wasn't their strength. It was their patience. Welcome back to my channel, my beautiful family and friends. If you're hooked in and you're ready to enjoy the story, click subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from, because tomorrow I will be giving you another story just as interesting as this one. And you don't want to miss it. Now let us begin. The woods had swallowed her screams 3 minutes ago. Lyra's lungs burned as she crashed through the underbrush, branches clawing at her face like the forest itself was trying to drag her back. Her pack, the emergency supplies she'd hidden for weeks, slammed against her spine with each desperate stride. The boundary stones were supposed to be behind her. She'd crossed them. She'd felt the resistance give way, that ancient magic releasing its hold like fingers uncurling from her throat. 47 seconds of freedom. That's all she'd gotten. The pulse of power that tore through the night hadn't been a warning. The thought of her mother made her chest constrict. By now, word would have spread through the pack. The alphas chosen ran. Her mother would face questions, suspicion, possibly punishment for Lyra's rebellion. But staying would have been a different kind of death, slower, more complete. At least this way, one of them might survive with their soul intact. You're heading west, Kieran's voice came again, closer now though she still couldn't see him. Toward the highway. Smart. You could hitchhike, maybe make it to Asheville before dawn. Disappear into a city where pack law means nothing, and I'm just another man. Lyra's breath hitched. That had been the plan exactly. How did he? Except you're not going to make it to the highway, Lyra. The way he said her name made something primal in her hindbrain scream warnings. Not anger. Anger she could understand, could predict. This was something colder. More deliberate. She burst through a thicket and found herself at the edge of a ravine. Moonlight gleamed off the creek 30 feet below, water rushing over rocks in a silver ribbon. She'd known this was here, had planned to follow the creek north for a mile before cutting back west. Behind her, a branch snapped. Lyra spun around, and there he was. Kieran stood at the tree line, utterly still in a way that made every instinct she possessed scream run. The moonlight loved him the way it loved predators, catching the sharp angles of his face, the impossible breadth of his shoulders, the casual way his hands hung at his sides despite the chainmail visible beneath his dark coat. He'd been at the victory hunt. Or at least, he'd wanted everyone to believe he was. His eyes found hers across the distance. Even in the darkness, they gleamed with an almost metallic quality, the gold amber of his wolf bleeding through his human form. Impressive, he said, and his voice was somehow worse without the distortion of distance. Rich and controlled, and absolutely devoid of mercy. 63 days of planning. I counted. You were very thorough. Ice flooded Lyra's veins. He'd known. This entire time he'd known. The supply caches were a nice touch. Kieran took a step forward. Just one, but Lyra felt it like a noose tightening. 3 different routes, multiple contingencies. You even researched the phase of the moon to maximize darkness. Another step. You studied the boundary magic, found that loophole in the old shaman's notes. Her throat had gone dust dry. She couldn't speak, couldn't move, couldn't do anything but watch him close the distance between them with the inexorable patience of a glacier. I'm curious, he continued, and now there was something sharp beneath the control, not quite anger, more like disappointment sharpened to a cutting edge. Did you really think I would notice? That you could spend 2 months preparing to leave me and I wouldn't feel it? I wasn't leaving you, Lyra managed, voice cracking. I was leaving the pack. Liar. The word cracked through the air like a gunshot. Lyra flinched, taking an involuntary step backward. Her heel hung over empty air, the ravine's edge. Kieran's expression didn't change, but something flickered in those inhuman eyes. Careful. That's a long way down. Then stop, Lyra said, and was surprised by the steadiness that crept into her voice. Stop coming closer. Let me go.
No. Just that.
Simple, absolute, final. You don't own me, she tried, desperation making her bold. The mating ceremony hasn't happened. By pack law, I'm still pack law. Kieran's laugh was a razor blade wrapped in silk. You want to discuss pack law? The same law that says running from your alpha is grounds for permanent exile? Or worse. Worse. He didn't need to elaborate. They both knew what happened to wolves who tried to leave and failed. The pack made examples. Public, brutal examples that ensured no one else got similar ideas. But there was something else in his words, something that didn't quite fit with the predators stalking toward her. Permanent exile meant she'd be cast out, forbidden from ever returning. But she'd be free.
Alive.
Away from him. Unless he was lying. Unless, worse, was exactly what he had planned.
Why?
The question ripped out of her. Why do you even want this? Want me? You could have anyone. Someone who actually wants to be your mate, who'd be honored by it. Because they would be honored by it. Kieran cut her off. Because they'd smile and bow and tell me exactly what I want to hear while plotting how to use me for their own advancement. He was close now, close enough that she could see the muscle working in his jaw. You told me I ruled through fear. You looked me in the eye and told me my leadership was poisoning the pack. Do you know how long it's been since anyone dared to be honest with me? That doesn't mean you get to own me. I don't want to own you. His voice dropped to something almost gentle, which was somehow more terrifying than his anger. I want you to choose me. Lyra's bitter laugh startled even herself. By taking away every other option? That's not choice, Kieran. That's coercion dressed up in pretty words. Something in his expression shifted, a crack in that impenetrable control. Pain, maybe. Or recognition. Then what would you have me do? Let you go? Watch you disappear into a world where I can't protect you, can't. He cut himself off, jaw clenching. Can't what? Control me. Can't keep you alive. The words exploded out of him, all that careful control shattering. You think I don't know there are packs out there who'd kill you just to hurt me? Rivals who'd see you as the perfect leverage? You think the human world is safer? You're a wolf, Lyra. You need pack, need territory, need. I need freedom, she shot back. I need to make my own choices, live my own life, not be some prize you claimed because I had the audacity to be honest. They stared at each other across 3 feet of moonlit ground. Kieran's chest heaved with barely contained emotion. Lyra's entire body trembled with adrenaline and terror, and something else she refused to name. Run again, Kieran said finally, voice dropping to barely above a whisper. His eyes held hers with an intensity that made her bones ache. I dare you. It wasn't a threat. Or maybe it was. Maybe it was permission and warning and challenge all woven together into 2 impossible words. Lyra's decision took exactly 1 heartbeat. She jumped. The fall lasted forever and no time at all. Lyra's stomach lurched into her throat as gravity claimed her. Wind screamed past her ears, snatching away the sound of Kieran's roar, raw and anguished and absolutely furious. She had one crystalline moment to appreciate the absolute insanity of jumping off a cliff to escape a man who could probably survive the same fall without breaking stride. Then she hit the water. The creek swallowed her whole, ice-cold and merciless. The impact punched every molecule of air from her lungs. Her pack became an anchor, dragging her down into darkness, where the current grabbed her with greedy fingers and pulled. Rocks scraped her shoulders, her hip, her shins. She tumbled end over end. Couldn't tell up from down, couldn't. Her wolf surged forward with an instinct older than thought. The shift rippled through her midspin, bones rearranging with practiced efficiency. Fur erupted across skin that had been split by rocks, sealing wounds even as new ones opened. Her muzzle broke the surface and she gasped, sucking in air and water in equal measure. Her legs found purchase against the stream bed and she kicked hard, fighting the current's pull. The pack was gone, torn away in the chaos.
Fine.
She didn't need supplies. She needed distance. Lyra hauled herself onto the opposite bank, sides heaving. Water streamed from her russet brown coat, Darker than most wolves, her mother used to say. Good for hiding in shadows, bad for pack politics where everyone wanted to shine. She shook once, violently, then lifted her head to scan the ravine's edge. Kieran stood exactly where she'd left him, a dark silhouette against the moonlit sky. Even from 30 feet below, she could feel the weight of his stare. He hadn't moved, hadn't jumped after her. He was just watching. Something about that stillness was worse than pursuit. Like he knew something she didn't. Like this was all still going according to some plan she couldn't see. Lyra didn't wait to find out. She turned and ran. The wolf form made everything sharper, sense exploding into complex stories, sounds layered into a three-dimensional map, the forest becoming an extension of her own body rather than an obstacle course. She could smell the deer that had passed this way hours ago, the fox den tucked beneath exposed roots, the faint, acrid trace of a black bear's territorial marker. And beneath it all, growing stronger with each stride, the iron and smoke scent of alpha.
He was following. Of course he was following.
But he was doing it wrong, staying upwind where she could track his progress, making no effort to mask his approach. Almost like he wanted her to know he was there. Wanted her to feel hunted. Psychological warfare. The bastard was still playing games. Lyra pushed harder, muscles burning as she navigated the creekside terrain. The highway was still miles west, but if she could maintain this pace, reach it before dawn, she might actually. The scent hit her like a physical blow. Lyra skidded to a halt so abruptly she nearly tumbled snout first into the mud. Every hair on her body stood on end. Her lips peeled back from her teeth in an involuntary snarl. Pack wolves. Multiple pack wolves. And they were positioned directly in her path. She cast her senses wider, trying to find a gap in their formation. North. 2 wolves, probably the Fletcher brothers based on the woody tobacco scent they both carried. South. 3 more, including one whose floral perfume marked her as Sienna Coldwell, the pack's best tracker and Kieran's most vocal supporter. They'd boxed her in, herded her like prey. Because that's exactly what she was. Your move, little archivist. Kieran's voice drifted through the darkness, still maddeningly calm. He hadn't shifted. She'd have smelled the change, felt the power surge. He was following in human form, in chainmail and leather, through terrain that should have slowed him down. Except nothing slowed down an alpha when he wanted something. Lyra's mind raced through options. She could try to break through the line. Wolves were territorial, but most wouldn't dare actually harm the alphas chosen, even if she was running. Or she could circle back, try to find another route, except that would take her closer to Kieran.
Or,
her gaze fixed on the creek, now swollen and rushing faster as the ravine narrowed into a gorge. Oh, this was stupid. This was categorically, monumentally stupid. She jumped back into the water. The current seized her immediately, twice as strong as before. This section of the creek fed into the Blackwater River, named for the way shadows pooled in its depths, and for the number of people who disappeared into those depths over the years. Local legends said the river was cursed. Pack legends said the river was simply indifferent to whether you lived or died, which was somehow worse. Lyra let the current take her, using her powerful wolf legs to keep her head above water and avoid the worst of the rocks. Behind her, she heard raised voices, pack members shouting coordinates, probably trying to pace her along the bank. Let them try. Even Sienna couldn't track through water. The gorge walls rose on either side, ancient stones slick with moss and shadow. The moon became a silver ribbon overhead, the forest's sounds fading to nothing but the river's roar. Lyra's limbs already ached from the cold and exertion, but she couldn't stop. Couldn't. The drop-off appeared without warning. 1 second she was paddling furiously against the current. The next there was nothing beneath her paws but air and fury. She barely had time to suck in a breath before the waterfall spat her into open space. This fall was longer. Much longer. Lyra shifted midair. Human form stood a better chance of surviving the impact. Her skin erupted with goosebumps as the frigid air hit her naked body. She managed to get vertical. Feet pointed down, arms tight against her sides the way her father had taught her before he died doing something equally reckless for the pack. At least it runs in the family, she thought hysterically, and then she hit. The pool at the waterfall's base drove the air from her lungs for the second time in 10 minutes. But it was deep, blessedly, impossibly deep. Lyra sank into darkness that felt almost peaceful compared to the chaos above. Her body wanted to rest, to just stop fighting and let the cold and exhaustion win. Instead, she kicked toward the surface. When she broke through, gasping and shaking, the first thing she saw was the cliff face towering above her, easily 60 feet of sheer stone with the waterfall cascading down its center like a silver wound. No way the pack could follow that route. Even Kieran would have to take the long way around, find a safe descent point. She'd bought herself time. Not much, but maybe enough. Lyra hauled herself onto the rocky shore, teeth chattering so violently she bit her tongue. Blood filled her mouth, copper-sharp and grounding. She was alive. Battered, hypothermic, stark naked in the Appalachian wilderness, but alive. And more importantly, alone. She allowed herself exactly 30 seconds to catch her breath, then forced her shaking body upright. The forest here felt different, older, wilder, thick with the kind of magic that predated pack law and human civilization. Trees towered overhead like cathedral pillars, their branches weaving together to block out most of the moonlight. The understory was dense with ferns and undergrowth that would make travel difficult, but provide excellent cover. Lyra's wolf stirred inside her, uneasy in this ancient place. Pack wolves were creatures of territory and hierarchy, comfortable with boundaries and rules. This forest had no boundaries. No rules except survival.
Perfect.
She shifted back to wolf form, easier to navigate, harder to spot, better insulated against the cold even if her fur was still soaked. Her paws made almost no sound on the carpet of moss and fallen leaves as she picked her way deeper into the old growth. Behind her, very faint but unmistakable, came the sound of something large moving through the forest. Not crashing through undergrowth the way the pack wolves would. Not calling out coordinates or strategies. Just steady, inexorable progress. Like a force of nature that couldn't be reasoned with or escaped. Lyra's ears flattened against her skull.
How?
How had he caught up so quickly? The waterfall should have. The realization hit her with sickening clarity. Kieran hadn't followed her down. He'd known where the river led. Known about the waterfall, the pool, probably every inch of this supposedly wild forest. He'd simply taken a faster route and gotten ahead of her. He'd been hurting her all along. Lyra. His voice came from everywhere and nowhere, distorted by the trees. This is getting tiresome. She kept moving, refusing to answer. Answering meant engaging, and engaging meant getting caught in whatever web of words he'd spin. Kieran was dangerous with his fists, but he was lethal with his vocabulary. You're hypothermic, he continued, and now she could pinpoint his location northeast, maybe 200 yards away. Even with your wolf's constitution, you've been in and out of freezing water twice now. Your core temperature is dropping. Soon your judgment will start to fail. Lyra's paws slipped on a patch of wet leaves. She caught herself, but barely. He wasn't wrong. Her muscles were already starting to feel sluggish, her thoughts developing that dangerous fuzzy quality that came before the real problem started. There's a ranger's cabin about a mile from here, Kieran said. Abandoned, but weatherproof. Fireplace, emergency supplies. I'll take you there, get you warm and dry, and then we can discuss this like rational adults instead of playing out some dramatic chase scene through the wilderness. It sounded reasonable. It sounded safe. Which meant it was absolutely a trap. Or you can keep running, he added, voice dropping to something almost conversational. See how far you get before exposure takes you down. I'll find you eventually. Probably unconscious in a ditch somewhere, blue-lipped and barely breathing. And then I'll carry you back to Packlands while you're too weak to fight me. Is that really how you want this to end? Lyra's snarl ripped through the darkness before she could stop it. The sound was pure frustration, rage at being cornered, fury at how he could make imprisonment sound like the reasonable choice. A low chuckle answered her. There she is. I was starting to think you'd gone mute. She hated him. Hated how he could find humor in her desperation. hated how his voice wrapped around her like chains disguised as silk, hated that even now, cold and exhausted and hunted, part of her wanted to believe his offer of warmth and safety. That part was a traitor. That part was how he'd win. Lyra changed direction, angling away from his voice. The forest floor began to slope upward, the terrain becoming rockier. Her paws found purchase on exposed stone, propelling her up what felt like an increasingly steep incline. Maybe if she could reach higher ground, get a vantage point, she could. The ground disappeared beneath her. For a moment of pure, detached terror, Lyra thought she'd found another cliff. Then her flailing paws hit wood, and she realized she'd fallen through something, rotted boards, maybe an old hunting blind or collapsed structure. She tumbled into darkness, hit earth hard enough to drive the wind from her lungs, and lay there stunned. The space around her smelled of age, and earth, and something else. Something metallic and wrong. Lyra's eyes adjusted slowly to the deeper darkness. She was in some kind of cellar or dugout, maybe 8 feet square with stone walls and the remnants of wooden support beams. The floor was hard-packed dirt except for one corner where her heart stopped.
Bones.
Not animal bones. Human bones. Or what had been human before they'd been picked clean and scattered. The skull leered at her from the shadows, jaw hanging open in a silent scream. This wasn't a hunting blind or storm cellar. This was a burial site. And based on the fresh earth piled in the opposite corner, it was still in use. Lyra scrambled backward, a whine building in her throat. She needed out, needed up, needed to be anywhere but here. Her claws scrabbled at the earthen walls, but found no purchase. The hole she'd fallen through was directly overhead but too high to jump to, especially in her current state.
Trapped.
She was trapped in a grave with someone's victim while the forest's most dangerous predator hunted her through the darkness. Lyra? Kieran's voice was closer now, sharpened with something that might have been concern. Where did you? His words cut off abruptly. Silence stretched taut, and then, don't move. Don't make a sound. The command in his voice was absolute, not alpha compulsion, but genuine urgency. And underneath it, fear. Lyra had never heard Kieran sound afraid. A new scent drifted into her prison, wild and rancid, nothing like wolf or bear or any natural predator. It carried notes of corruption and madness, like meat left to spoil in the summer sun. Her wolf recoiled from it instinctively, every instinct screaming wrong, wrong, wrong. Above ground, something growled. It wasn't a wolf's growl. It was broken glass and grinding metal, the sound of vocal cords that had forgotten how to form proper shapes. Lyra pressed herself against the earthen wall, making herself as small as possible, praying that whatever was up there wouldn't notice the hole, wouldn't smell her fear, wouldn't. The growling stopped. In the terrible silence that followed, Lyra heard breathing. Heavy, labored, wet. And then footsteps, not paws but feet. Human feet that dragged and shuffled like they'd forgotten how walking worked. Back away from the den, Kane, Kieran said, his voice carrying that careful neutrality people used when facing down unstable explosives. This isn't pack territory. You have no claim here.
Kane.
The name struck a chord in Lyra's memory, something from the archives, from the restricted section she wasn't supposed to access. Kane Whistler, son of the previous Alpha. Kieran's half-brother, killed in the Succession Challenge 5 years ago. Except apparently not killed. Not completely. Smell, pretty thing. The voice that rasped from above barely sounded human. Words bent around broken teeth and a tongue that might have been partially severed. Down in the dark mine. She's not yours, Kieran replied, and now there was steel beneath the calm. She's under my protection. A wet, rattling laugh. Protected in my hunting ground?
In my den.
Shuffling sounds, something being dragged across the ground. Mine now, little Alpha, all mine? Lyra's heart hammered against her ribs. This thing, this creature that had once been Kane Whistler had been living out here. Hunting out here. Building a collection of victims in an earthen grave that she'd just fallen into. And Kieran was standing between it and her. Last chance, Kane, Kieran said, and power hummed through his words now. Alpha compulsion turned up to levels that made Lyra's teeth ache even from 10 feet underground. Walk away. Return to whatever hole you've been living in. Forget you saw anything here. Already forgot. So much. Another wet chuckle. Forgot how you looked when you tore out my throat. Want to remember, want to make you scream like I screamed. The attack, when it came, was heralded by a sound Lyra would hear in nightmares for the rest of her life, assuming she had a rest of her life. Something between a roar and a shriek, primal and agonized, and filled with 5 years of festering hatred. Then the forest erupted into violence. From her prison beneath the earth, Lyra could only experience the battle through sound and scent, and both told a story of absolute carnage. Bodies collided overhead with enough force to shake dirt from the walls. Snarls and roars twisted together into a symphony of violence. The wet, meaty sounds of claws meeting flesh. The crack of breaking bone. And through it all, that rancid smell of corruption grew stronger, mixing with the clean iron scent of fresh blood. Kieran's blood. She could distinguish it from Kane's tainted stench, that unique signature that marked him as Alpha, rich with power, and something else she'd never been able to name. And there was too much of it. Way too much. Lyra paced her earthen cell, desperate and useless. Every instinct screamed at her to help, to fight, to do something other than cower in a hole while the man who'd been hunting her got torn apart protecting her. The irony would have been hilarious if it wasn't so horrifying. Above, something heavy hit the ground hard enough to send tremors through the packed earth. A pained grunt, distinctly human, distinctly Kieran. Then that broken glass laugh from Kane, triumphant and unhinged. Should have stayed dead. Kane's ruined voice drifted down. Should have let me have the pack. You are killing them, Kieran rasped, and even wounded he sounded absolutely certain. The weaker ones first. The children. You are turning into exactly what the old laws forbid. A rabid alpha. I did what had to be done. Rabid. Kane's laugh dissolved into coughing that sounded like it brought up pieces of lung. You think
I'm rabid.
you broke pack law, left me alive. Broken. Should have finished it, little brother. You're right, Kieran said, and something in his voice made Lyra's blood run cold. I should have. The fight resumed with renewed savagery. Lyra heard the distinctive sound of a shift, bones cracking and reforming, flesh rippling into new configurations. Kieran's wolf emerging, probably because his human form had taken too much damage. His growl was pure alpha dominance, the kind that should have made any wolf, even a half-dead, insane one, submit on instinct. But Kane had been living beyond pack law for 5 years. He'd forgotten how to submit. The battle raged for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Lyra found herself pressing against the earthen wall, trying to get closer to the sounds, closer to...
What?
What exactly was she trying to accomplish? She was trapped. Helpless. A liability that Kieran was bleeding to protect. Just like you always are, whispered a voice in her head that sounded suspiciously like Sienna Coldwell. Just like your father, noble and useless and dead because of it. Something crashed directly above her prison. More dirt rained down, and for a heart-stopping moment, Lyra thought the entire structure would collapse and bury her alive with the bones. But the walls held, and the fighting moved away, deeper into the forest. Silence settled like ash. Lyra waited, counting her own heartbeats. At 200, she allowed herself to hope they'd killed each other or moved too far away to matter. At 300, she started trying to figure out how to climb out of a hole with no handholds while in wolf form. At 315, Kieran's face appeared in the opening above. Even in the moonlight, she could see he was a mess. His face was painted in blood, his own and Kane's, with deep claw marks running from temple to jaw. His left shoulder hung at a wrong angle, probably dislocated. His chainmail had been shredded in places, revealing raw flesh beneath. But his eyes were clear, alert, very much alive. Are you hurt? He asked, voice rough from the shift and probably from screaming. Lyra shifted back to human form, suddenly aware of her nakedness, but too exhausted to care.
Ai fine.
You look like you went through a meat grinder. Accurate assessment. He lowered himself to his belly, reaching down with his good arm. Can you jump? I'll pull you up. She eyed the distance. Maybe 6 feet, but she was cold and tired, and her muscles felt like they'd been replaced with wet rope. What about Kane?
Dead.
Actually dead this time. Something flickered across his face. Regret, maybe, or just exhaustion. I made sure. Lyra's throat tightened. Despite everything, the escape attempts, the chase, the absolute chaos of this night, Kieran had just killed his half-brother. Again. And he'd done it to save her. I'm sorry, she said, and meant it. His laugh was bitter. Don't be. I should have finished it 5 years ago. My mistake. He stretched his arm down further. Now jump before I bleed out, and we both die in this God's-forsaken forest. That got her moving. Lyra backed up as far as the small space allowed, then launched herself upward. Her fingers caught Kieran's wrist, and his hand clamped around hers like iron. For a moment she hung suspended, feet scrabbling against the earthen wall, and she was absolutely certain his injured shoulder would give out, and they'd both tumble into the grave. But Kieran held. He always held. With a grunt of effort that sounded like it cost him dearly, he hauled her up and out. Lyra sprawled on solid ground, gasping, before scrambling to her feet and taking in the scene. The forest looked like a tornado had hit it. Trees were scarred with claw marks, branches broken and hanging at angles. The ground churned into mud and blood. And there, about 20 feet away, lay what was left of Kane Whistler. Lyra looked away quickly. Some things, once seen, couldn't be unseen. Kieran had managed to push himself into a sitting position, back against a tree. His face was the color of old parchment under the blood. The dislocated shoulder was the least of his problems. Deep lacerations covered his torso, and one leg was bent at an angle that suggested the bone beneath was compromised. He was dying. Maybe not immediately, but without medical attention soon. Go, he said, reading her expression. The cabin I mentioned is northwest, about a mile. There's a first aid kit, warm clothes, and probably a satellite phone in the emergency supplies. Call for pack retrieval. Tell them the Alpha's down, and then... He waved his good hand vaguely. Do whatever you want. Run, hide, start a new life. I won't stop you. Lyra stared at him. You're giving me permission to leave? I'm giving you the choice, he corrected. The thing I should have given you from the beginning. His eyes met hers, and for the first time since she'd known him, there was no dominance in his gaze. No alpha compulsion or territorial possession. Just exhaustion, and something that looked almost like defeat. I was wrong. About a lot of things, but especially about trying to claim you without your consent. So go. Be free. Just send help first if you're feeling charitable. It was everything she'd wanted. Freedom, acknowledgement, actual respect for her autonomy. He was wounded, possibly fatally, completely at her mercy. She could walk away. Should walk away. This was literally the best chance she'd ever get. Instead, Lyra heard herself say, "Where's the cabin?" Kieran blinked. What? The cabin. With the first aid supplies. How do I get there? She was already scanning the forest, trying to orient herself. And how do I reset a dislocated shoulder? Because that's going to limit your mobility and you've already lost too much blood. Lyra. Northwest, you said. Give me landmarks. You're not listening, Kieran said, and there was something almost frantic beneath his usual control. I'm letting you go. Take the win and run before I change my mind. Will you? Lyra challenged, meeting his eyes. Change your mind? The silence stretched between them, heavy with implications and unspoken truths. Finally, Kieran shook his head.
No.
I won't. Then, I'm not going anywhere until you're stable enough to survive the night. She knelt beside him, trying not to wince at the extent of his injuries. You saved my life. Kane would have found me eventually, would have. She cut herself off, not wanting to think about what the creature Kane had become would have done. I owe you. You don't owe me anything, Kieran said quietly. Least of all your life. Maybe not. But I'm not leaving you to bleed out because of some pride-fueled need to prove I'm independent. Lyra gently probed his dislocated shoulder, feeling him tense under her touch. This is going to hurt. Everything hurts. It's going to hurt more. She positioned her hands, remembering the emergency training her mother had insisted she learn. On 3. 1. She popped it back on 1 because nobody ever actually waited for 3. Kieran's roar could have woken the dead, or at least whatever other creatures were lurking in this cursed forest. His good hand shot out and grabbed her wrist hard enough to bruise, every muscle in his body locked rigid with pain. Then he released her, breathing hard. You said 3.
Elite.
If I'd actually counted, you would have tensed up and made it worse. Remind me to include sadistic healer in your list of qualities, he muttered, but there was no real heat in it. The shoulder was back in place, and while it would need proper medical attention, at least he could move again. Sort of. The leg was still a problem, as was the blood loss and the approximately 1,000 other injuries covering his body. Can you walk? Lyra asked. Define walk. Move forward under your own power, without bleeding out or passing out.
Kieran considered this.
Probably not. Wonderful. Lyra looked down at herself, still naked, still covered in various forms of wilderness detritus, definitely not dressed for hiking through the Appalachian forest while supporting a man who probably weighed twice what she did. The cabin, she said firmly. Landmarks.
Now.
You're serious about this? Do I look like I'm joking? Kieran studied her for a long moment, something unreadable flickering across his face. Northwest until you hit a creek, not the river, smaller. Follow it upstream for maybe half a mile. The cabin will be on the eastern bank, set back about 50 yards. Built from local stone, has a green metal roof. How do you know all this? I've been patrolling these woods for 5 years, he said quietly. Looking for Kane. Making sure he didn't hurt anyone else. Making sure. He trailed off. Making sure he didn't have to admit his half-brother had survived. Making sure his mistake didn't come back to destroy everything he'd built. Carrying that guilt and responsibility alone, because that's what alphas did. They shouldered burdens until those burdens crushed them. Lyra had spent months hating Kieran for his control, his dominance, his absolute certainty that he knew what was best for everyone. But looking at him now, broken and bleeding and still trying to protect her, she wondered if maybe she'd been looking at it all wrong. Maybe his control wasn't about power. Maybe it was about preventing exactly this kind of chaos. Right, she said, pushing those thoughts aside to examine later. Creek, upstream, stone cabin, green roof. I can do that. But I'm not leaving you here undefended. She glanced at Kane's corpse and suppressed a shudder. Are there others like him out here?
No.
Kieran's certainty was absolute. Kane was an anomaly. He survived what should have been fatal because he was alpha-born, with healing abilities beyond normal wolves. But that kind of injury, it broke something fundamental. Drove him insane. He followed her gaze to the body. I should have given him a clean death. Instead, I condemned him to 5 years of agony and madness. You didn't know he'd survive. I should have made sure he didn't. Kieran closed his eyes, exhaustion winning over stubbornness. Add it to the list of my failures. Lyra wanted to argue, to point out that mercy, even misguided mercy, wasn't a failure. But now wasn't the time for philosophy. Now was the time for action. She shifted to wolf form, ignoring her body's protests. Her fur was still damp, her paw pads torn from running over rocks, her muscles screaming for rest. But she had a job to do. Find the cabin.
Get supplies.
Save the alpha. Then maybe figure out what the hell she actually wanted. The forest seemed less menacing in wolf form, though that might have been because she'd already faced its worst nightmare and survived. Lyra picked her way northwest, nose questing for the scent of water. The moon had begun its descent toward the horizon, which meant dawn wasn't far off. She needed to move fast. The creek appeared after about 10 minutes of careful navigation. Smaller than the river, like Kieran had said, but still running swift and cold. Lyra followed it upstream, counting her steps, watching for stone and metal.
There.
Set back from the water. Almost invisible beneath overhanging trees, stood the cabin. It was more substantial than she'd expected. Not some rickety hunter's shack, but a proper structure with walls that looked like they'd withstand just about anything short of artillery fire. The door was unlocked, which should have been surprising, but somehow wasn't. Out here, this far from civilization, locks were more of a suggestion than a security measure. Inside, the cabin was spartanly furnished but clean. A wood stove dominated one corner, a cot hugged another, and built-in shelves held an array of supplies that would make any prepper weep with joy. Lyra shifted to human form and immediately started cataloging what she needed. First aid kit, large, professional grade, emergency blankets, clothing that would fit, maybe, water, and there, a satellite phone charging on a solar battery. She grabbed the medical kit first, along with blankets and a flannel shirt that was probably meant for someone Kieran's size but would work as a dress on her. No time for modesty, anyway. The trek back took half the time, partially because she knew where she was going and partially because terror at what she might find drove her faster. When she burst back into the clearing, her heart didn't start beating again until she saw Kieran's chest rising and falling. Still alive. Still fighting. She dropped beside him and started working with the efficiency her mother had drilled into her. Clean the wounds, apply pressure to the ones still bleeding, pack the worst with gauze, wrap everything that needed wrapping. The leg was definitely broken. She could feel the fracture beneath the swelling, so she splinted it with branches and more gauze. Through it all, Kieran drifted in and out of consciousness, occasionally making observations that ranged from helpful, deeper, that one's still bleeding, to completely unhelpful. Did you know your eyes turn gold when you're concentrating? Shut up and let me work, Lyra muttered, securing the last of the bandages. Yes, ma'am. But his lips quirked in something almost like a smile. When she was done, she sat back and assessed her work. He looked like a mummy, but a mummy who might actually survive until proper help arrived. The bleeding had stopped or, at least slowed, to manageable levels. His color was still terrible, but not quite as corpse-like. The phone, Kieran said. You should call. In a minute. Lyra pulled one of the emergency blankets around her shoulders, suddenly aware of how cold she was. Let me catch my breath first. They sat in silence, two natural enemies who'd somehow ended up on the same side through a series of increasingly improbable events. Dawn was beginning to paint the eastern sky in shades of amber and rose. Birds started their morning songs, oblivious to or unconcerned by the carnage beneath the trees. Why did you come back? Kieran asked finally. Lyra considered lying, giving some noble reason about honor or debt. But he'd been honest with her, probably more honest than he'd been with anyone in years. He deserved the same. I don't know, she admitted. Maybe because leaving you to die would have made me exactly what you've been trying to prove I'm not. Someone who runs away from hard choices. Or maybe because. She trailed off, not sure how to finish that sentence. Because you gave me a choice, she said quietly. And that changes things. Kieran was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was barely above a whisper. What if I asked you to come back? Not as my chosen mate or my prisoner or whatever twisted arrangement I was trying to force. Just come back. Help me figure out how to be better than my father, better than what the pack expects. You're good at seeing the truth of things, even when it's ugly. Especially when it's ugly. You want me to be your conscience? Lyra couldn't keep the skepticism from her voice. I want you to be my partner, he corrected. In rebuilding what's broken. In proving that pack law can evolve past fear and domination. In, he stopped, pain or exhaustion or maybe honesty finally breaking through. I want you to choose me. Not because I'm alpha or because pack law demands it, but because you actually want to. It was the most vulnerable thing she'd ever heard from him. No commands, no certainty, just raw hope wrapped in resignation. And Lyra found she didn't have an answer. Not yet. Ask me again, she said finally, when you're not bleeding out and I'm not having a nervous breakdown in the woods. When we're both thinking clearly and can have an actual conversation about what that partnership would look like. That's not a no. It's not a yes either. I'll take it. Kieran's eyes drifted closed. Make the call, Lyra. Please. She retrieved the satellite phone and dialed the emergency pack number, a sequence she'd memorized years ago because her mother insisted all pack members know it. A gruff voice answered on the second ring. This is Lyra Reeves, she said, and her voice only shook a little. Alpha, Thorn is down. We're in the Old Forest, about a mile northwest of... She rattled off their approximate location based on landmarks. He needs immediate medical evacuation. Multiple lacerations, broken bones, severe blood loss. Questions erupted from the other end. Who, what, how, why, but Lyra just repeated the location and ended the call. They'd either come or they wouldn't. Either way, she'd done what she could. She settled beside Kieran, close enough to monitor his breathing but not quite touching. The sun continued its rise, burning away the night and all its terrors. Somewhere in the distance, she heard the first howls of the rescue party mobilizing. And for the first time in years, Lyra felt something that wasn't fear or resignation. She felt possibility. The rescue party arrived with the subtlety of an avalanche. Lyra heard them before she saw them, a dozen wolves crashing through the underbrush with all the grace of a freight train. The howls had been getting closer for the past 20 minutes, each one more urgent than the last. She'd used the time to do what she could, keep Kieran conscious, monitor his breathing, and try not to think about what the pack's reaction would be when they found their alpha broken and their would-be Luna covered in his blood. The first wolf to burst into the clearing was massive, easily alpha-sized, with a coat like burnished copper. He shifted mid-stride, and suddenly a man stood there, naked and furious and radiating enough dominance to make Lyra's wolf whimper and press low to the ground. What the hell happened? He demanded, eyes taking in the scene. Kieran wrapped in makeshift bandages, Lyra huddled beside him in an oversized flannel, and Kane's corpse still cooling 20 feet away. Finian, Kieran said, his voice carrying just enough command to cut through his second-in-command's panic. Stand down. She saved my life. Finian's gaze snapped to Lyra, and she saw the exact moment recognition clicked. This is the runner. The one who patched me up and called for help instead of letting me bleed out, Kieran interrupted. Show some gratitude. More wolves poured into the clearing, shifting to human form in various states of readiness. Lyra recognized most of them. The Fletcher brothers looking characteristically unimpressed, a young medic named Ruth who immediately dropped to her knees beside Kieran with a proper medical kit, and, of course, Sienna Coldwell, whose expression could have curdled milk at 50 paces. You ran, Sienna said flatly, ignoring everyone else. You crossed the boundary, broke pack law, and now you're sitting here playing hero? I didn't play anything, Lyra replied, keeping her voice level. Kane Whistler was alive. He attacked. Kieran fought him. I helped after. The name Kane Whistler sent ripples through the gathered wolves. Conversations died mid-sentence. The Fletcher brothers exchanged loaded glances. Even Ruth paused in her examination of Kieran's injuries. Kane's dead, Finian said carefully. Has been for 5 years. He was alive, Kieran confirmed, and his voice carried the weight of absolute truth, an alpha's word, unquestionable. Broken and insane, but alive. Living in the Old Forest hunting humans. He gestured toward the corpse. Now he's actually dead. Ruth made a small sound of distress as she unwrapped Lyra's hasty bandage work. Alpha, these wounds, you need a hospital.
Surgery.
This is way beyond field medicine. Then get me to a hospital, Kieran said. But Lyra comes with us. Under my protection. Sienna's laugh was sharp as broken glass. You're protecting the woman who tried to abandon the pack? Who broke sacred law? That's not protection, Alpha. That's favoritism, and the pack won't. The pack will do what I tell them. Kieran cut her off, and there was steel beneath the exhaustion. Or are you challenging my authority, Sienna? The clearing went silent. Challenging an Alpha, even one who is currently bleeding and broken, was tantamount to declaring a succession challenge. Sienna was strong, skilled, but she wasn't Alpha-born. She'd lose, and she knew it. No challenge, she said finally, each word bitten off. But this sets a precedent. If she can run without consequences. She didn't run without consequences, Kieran interrupted. She nearly died running from me, fell into a serial killer's burial pit, and then chose to save my life instead of taking her freedom. I'd say she's paid whatever debt pack law demands. His gaze swept the gathered wolves. Anyone disagree? No one spoke. Several looked like they wanted to, but Kieran's tone, even weakened, didn't invite discussion. Good, he said. Now get me out of this forest before I pass out and make this everyone's problem. The evacuation was a study in controlled chaos. Ruth and her assistant stabilized Kieran as much as field conditions allowed. Then the strongest wolves fashioned a stretcher from branches and emergency blankets. Finian coordinated with pack headquarters via satellite phone, arranging for a medical helicopter to meet them at the nearest clearing large enough for landing. Through it all, Lyra stayed close to Kieran, partially because he'd ordered it, but mostly because the alternative was being surrounded by pack wolves who regarded her with emotions ranging from suspicion to outright hostility. At least near Kieran, they had to maintain some pretense of civility. You don't have to do this, she murmured as they began the trek out. The protection thing. I can handle whatever consequences. No, Kieran said flatly. You saved my life. That creates a debt, and I pay my debts. He paused, then added more quietly, and I meant what I said earlier. About choice. About partnership. None of that works if I let the pack tear you apart the moment we get back. They're not going to accept it, Lyra said. Your advisors, the traditionalists, they'll fight this. Let them. There was grim amusement in his voice. I've been looking for an excuse to shake up pack politics anyway. You just gave me the perfect catalyst. Lyra wasn't sure whether to be flattered or terrified that she'd accidentally become the centerpiece of what sounded like a political revolution. The helicopter was waiting at a clearing about 3 miles from where they'd started, a sleek medical transport with the pack's symbol emblazoned on the side. Paramedics swarmed Kieran the moment they arrived, transferring him to a proper stretcher and hooking up IVs while rattling off medical jargon that Lyra only half understood. You're coming too, Ruth said, appearing at Lyra's elbow with a blanket and a stern expression. You're hypothermic, you've got lacerations that need cleaning, and you look like you're about 3 seconds from collapse. I'm fine, Lyra protested, even as her knees decided that was an excellent time to stop supporting her weight. Ruth caught her before she hit the ground. Yeah, you look fine. Come on, hero. Let's get you checked out before you embarrass yourself further. The helicopter ride passed in a blur. Lyra vaguely registered being wrapped in heated blankets, having her vitals checked, receiving a lecture about the dangers of prolonged cold water exposure. Across the narrow space, Kieran lay unconscious while paramedics worked to stabilize him for transport to the pack's private medical facility. Is he going to be okay? Lyra asked at one point. The lead paramedic, a grizzled older woman with kind eyes, glanced over. He's alpha. They're harder to kill than cockroaches and twice as stubborn. He'll be fine. She paused. Thanks to you, apparently. I just did basic first aid. Basic first aid that kept him alive long enough for actual help to arrive. Trust me, honey, the alpha knows the difference between I helped and I saved your life. And so does everyone else. That's what Lyra was afraid of. The pack's medical facility was less hospital and more fortress that happened to have medical equipment. Built into the mountainside on the northern edge of pack territory, it served as both treatment center and secure location for pack members who needed protection or isolation. Lyra had been here exactly once before, when her mother had been treating a difficult case and needed an extra pair of hands. Now she was the patient, and the irony wasn't lost on her. They separated her from Kieran immediately, him to surgery, her to a private examination room where a doctor who looked far too young to have his credentials thoroughly checked her over. Minor hypothermia, multiple lacerations, severe exhaustion, possible mild concussion from one of her falls. Nothing life-threatening, but enough that they wanted to keep her overnight for observation. Observation turned out to mean a private room with a comfortable bed, clean clothes, and a guard posted outside her door. For her protection, they said. To keep pack members from bothering her while she recovered. Lyra wasn't naive enough to believe that was the only reason. She slept fitfully, jerking awake at every sound, half expecting to find either pack wolves demanding justice or Kieran standing over her bed with that intense stare that made her feel simultaneously seen and trapped. But the room remained empty except for periodic visits from nurses checking vitals and a dinner tray that appeared and disappeared mostly untouched. By the next morning, Lyra felt almost human again. Her cuts had been properly cleaned and bandaged, the hypothermia had resolved, and someone had left a set of clothes that actually fit: dark jeans, a soft sweater, and sturdy boots. Pack standard clothing, practical and durable. She was examining the boots, trying to decide if they were a gift or a uniform, when someone knocked on the door. "Come in," she called, expecting a nurse. Finian entered instead, looking substantially less panicked than he had in the forest, but no less imposing. In the daylight, Lyra could see he was probably only a few years older than her, with sharp features and eyes that missed nothing. "You're awake," he observed. "Good. We need to talk." Lyra's stomach sank. About what happens next? Finian closed the door and leaned against it, casual posture, but positioned to block her exit. "The Alpha is out of surgery. Stable, conscious, and already driving the medical staff insane with demands to be released. He's asking for you. And you're here to what? Warn me off. Threaten me if I don't leave Pack territory immediately."
No.
Finian's expression was unreadable. "I'm here to ask what your intentions are." "My intentions?" "Toward the Alpha. Toward the Pack." He crossed his arms. "You ran. You made it clear you didn't want to be here. Then you saved his life. Then you came back voluntarily, when you could have disappeared. So, what changed? And more importantly, what do you want now?" It was a fair question. Lyra wished she had a clear answer. "I don't know," she admitted. 24 hours ago, I wanted freedom. Now." She gestured helplessly. "Now, I'm not sure what I want, except maybe to not be treated like property." "The Alpha doesn't see you as property." "No, he sees me as a project. Or a prize. Or I don't even know what he sees, and that's part of the problem." Finian studied her for a long moment. "He sees someone who tells him the truth," he said finally. "Do you have any idea how rare that is? How many people spend their entire lives avoiding honesty with an Alpha because they're too afraid of the consequences?" "That's not my problem to solve." "Maybe not. But it became your problem the moment he decided you were worth claiming." Finian pushed off the door, his posture shifting from confrontational to something almost conspiratorial. "Look, I'll be straight with you. The Pack is divided. Half think you should be exiled for running. The other half think the Alpha's obsession with you is compromising his judgment. Nobody's happy about this situation. Except maybe Kieran," Lyra muttered. "Except maybe Kieran," Finian agreed with a ghost of a smile. "Which is why I need to know. Are you going to break his heart, or are you going to help him fix what's broken in this Pack?" The question hung in the air between them, weighted with implications Lyra wasn't ready to examine. "Can I do both?" she finally asked. Finian's laugh was surprised and genuine. "Probably. But I'd recommend choosing one before the Pack Council forces your hand." He moved toward the door, then paused. "For what it's worth, I think you're good for him. He's been carrying Kane's supposed death, like a stone around his neck for 5 years. The guilt was eating him alive. Maybe now he can finally let it go." After Finian left, Lyra sat on the edge of the bed, turning his words over in her mind. She hadn't thought about what Kane's survival and subsequent actual death might mean for Kieran beyond the immediate physical danger. But Finian was right. Kieran had been living with the belief that he'd executed his half-brother, that he'd made the hard choice and ended a threat. Finding out Kane had survived in agony, had become a monster who murdered innocents, had been out there suffering because Kieran hadn't finished the job, that was a different kind of burden entirely. The knock that came an hour later was softer, more hesitant. Lyra opened the door to find her mother standing in the hallway, face drawn with worry and relief in equal measure. "Mom," Lyra breathed, and then she was being pulled into a fierce embrace that smelled like home and healing herbs and safety. "You reckless, brilliant, terrifying child," her mother said into her hair. "When they told me you'd run, I thought I'd never see you again. And then when they said you'd saved the Alpha's life," she pulled back, gripping Lyra's shoulders hard enough to hurt. "What were you thinking? Which part? The running or the saving?" "Both. Either. All of it." Her mother's eyes, the same warm brown as Lyra's own, searched her face. "Are you okay? Really okay?"
Was she?
Lyra did a quick internal inventory, physically battered but healing, emotionally exhausted, existentially confused about every major life choice she'd made in the past 72 hours. "I'm alive," she said. "That's better than several other possible outcomes." Her mother made a sound that was half laugh, half sob. "That's not an answer, but I'll take it." She guided Lyra back into the room, closing the door for privacy. "The pack is in chaos. Half of them want you punished, the other half want you elevated to hero status, and the council is demanding an explanation for everything from the escape attempt to Kane Whistler's resurrection." "Kane wasn't resurrected. He just never died in the first place." Semantics that make the situation worse, not better. Her mother sat on the edge of the bed, suddenly looking older than Lyra had ever seen her. "There's going to be a tribunal. Probably within the week. You'll have to answer for breaking pack law, and Kieran will have to answer for—" She waved a hand vaguely. "Everything, apparently. Can they actually punish an alpha? They can try to force abdication if they think he's unfit to lead. It's rare, but it has happened." Her mother's expression was grave. And this situation, claiming a mate who ran, protecting her from consequences, killing his supposedly dead brother, it gives them ammunition. Lyra's stomach dropped. "I never wanted to cause problems for him." "I know. But intentions don't matter much to politicians." Her mother took Lyra's hand, squeezing gently. "So, here's what I need to know. Do you care about him? Even a little?" The question was too big, too complicated, loaded with implications that stretched into a future Lyra couldn't see. But her mother deserved honesty. "I don't know," Lyra said slowly. "I spent months hating him for taking away my choice. And then he gave it back, even though it might cost him everything. And then he almost died protecting me. So, do I care? Maybe. But I don't know if I care enough, or in the right way, or—" She broke off, frustrated. "How do you know? How do you know if someone is worth appending your entire life for?" Her mother smiled sadly. "You don't. Not until you've already done it, and you're standing in the wreckage wondering if you made the right choice." She tucked a strand of hair behind Lyra's ear, a gesture from childhood. "But I can tell you this. Your father was worth it. Every hard day, every sacrifice, every moment of doubt. He was worth it."
"Because he saw me."
"Really saw me. Not what I could do for him or how I fit into his plans, but me. And Kieran sees me? I think he's trying to. Whether he succeeds." Her mother shrugged. "That's something you'll have to figure out together." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, mother and daughter, two women who'd both loved dangerous men and paid the price in different ways. "The tribunal," Lyra said finally. "What do I need to do?" "Tell the truth. Stand your ground. And whatever you do, don't apologize for surviving." Her mother stood, pressing a kiss to Lyra's forehead. "You're stronger than you think, sweetheart. Stronger than this pack gives you credit for. Show them." After she left, Lyra stood at the window, looking out over pack territory. Somewhere in the compound, Kieran was recovering from wounds he'd taken protecting her. Somewhere else, pack members were probably arguing about whether she deserved exile or execution or elevation. And somewhere in her own heart, a decision was forming, not about love or destiny or any of the grand narratives people liked to assign to these situations, but about what kind of person she wanted to be, what kind of life she wanted to build, and whether that life could possibly include an alpha who'd hunted her through the forest and then bled to keep her alive. What would you choose if you could actually see all the consequences laid out in front of you? She wondered. Would you run again? Or would you stay and fight for something worth having? She didn't have an answer yet. But she was starting to think that maybe, just maybe, the question itself was the point. The tribunal convened 3 days later in the Great Hall, a pretentious name for what was essentially a massive log cabin with delusions of grandeur. Lyra had been confined to her room for most of that time, ostensibly for her own protection, but really because the Pack Council wanted her isolated while they decided her fate. She'd spent the hours reading, sleeping, and trying not to think about the fact that her entire future was being debated by people who'd already decided she was guilty of something. Kieran had tried to visit twice. Both times, his advisors had intercepted him with concerns about propriety and maintaining impartiality. The third time, he'd apparently told them to go to hell and shown up at her door anyway, still moving like every step hurt but refusing to show weakness. "You look terrible," Lyra had said, which was both true and deeply inadequate. "You look beautiful," he'd replied, which was both ridiculous and oddly sincere. They talked for an hour, carefully avoiding the topics that mattered: the tribunal, their relationship, what happens next, and instead discussing safer subjects like books and Pack history and whether the medical facility's coffee was actually trying to poison them or just tasted that way naturally. It was the most normal conversation they'd ever had, which somehow made everything else feel more complicated. Now, standing outside the Great Hall with her mother on one side and Finian on the other, Lyra wondered if this was what lambs felt like before slaughter. Except lambs probably didn't have to wear formal Pack attire, dark dress, fitted and elegant, that made her feel like she was playing dress-up in someone else's life. "Remember," her mother said quietly.
Truth.
"Strength.
No apologies."
And if they vote for exile, then we exile ourselves together. Her mother's smile was fierce. "You're not alone in this, sweetheart. Whatever happens." The doors opened before Lyra could respond, revealing the Great Hall in all its intimidating glory. The space was circular, designed so that Pack members could sit in concentric rings around a central speaking area. Today, those rings were packed. Easily 200 wolves, all dressed formally, all watching as Lyra entered. The council sat at the far end, elevated on a dais that was absolutely meant to emphasize their authority. 5 members, 3 men, 2 women, all older, all radiating the kind of power that came from decades of Pack politics. And in the center, in a chair that wasn't quite a throne but came close, sat Kieran. He looked better than he had 3 days ago, the worst injuries hidden beneath formal clothing, his posture carefully controlled to hide any weakness. But Lyra could see the tightness around his eyes, the way he held his left side just slightly protected. He was hurting, and he was refusing to show it. Their eyes met across the distance. Something passed between them, not quite understanding, not quite trust, but maybe the beginning of both. "Lyra Reeves," the eldest council member announced, his voice carrying despite his age. "You stand before the Pack Council to answer for crimes against Pack law. Specifically, unauthorized departure from Pack territory, crossing the boundary without Alpha permission, and abandonment of your designated position as the Alpha's chosen mate. How do you plead?" This was it. The moment where she either submitted to Pack authority or burned every bridge she'd ever built. Lyra took a breath and stepped into the center of the hall. "I plead nothing," she said clearly, "because I don't recognize those charges as crimes." A collective gasp rippled through the assembled wolves. Even Kieran looked surprised, though he covered it quickly. The council member's expression darkened. "You don't recognize Pack law?" "I recognize Pack law. I just don't agree that leaving territory you never chose to be part of, or refusing a mating bond you never agreed to, constitutes a crime." Lyra met his gaze steadily. "Pack law is supposed to protect us, not imprison us. Pack law maintains order." Another council member, a woman with silver-streaked hair and a voice like frost, interjected. "Without it, we have chaos. You broke that order. You must face consequences." "Then let's talk about consequences," Lyra said. "I left Pack territory. That's true. I also saved your Alpha's life, helped eliminate a threat that had been murdering humans for 5 years, and returned voluntarily when I could have disappeared forever. So, which consequences are we discussing? The ones for running, or the ones for everything that happened after?" "They're not mutually exclusive," a third council member argued. You can't erase a crime just because you did something good later. No, but you can acknowledge context, Lyra shot back. I ran because I was being forced into a mating bond one didn't consent to. That's not rebellion. That's self-preservation. The Alpha chose you, the silver-haired woman said coldly. That's an honor, not a prison sentence. An honor I never wanted. An honor that nobody asked if I'd accept. Lyra could feel her temper rising but forced herself to stay controlled. Getting emotional would just confirm their belief that she was too unstable for pack life. Tell me something, if Kieran had actually asked, without pack pressure or alpha compulsion or public declarations, would that have been pack law too? Or would that have been basic respect? The hall erupted into arguments. Some wolves shouting support, others demanding punishment, the whole thing devolving into exactly the kind of chaos the council claimed to prevent. Enough! Kieran's voice cut through the noise like a blade, carrying alpha compulsion that made every wolf in the room freeze. He stood carefully, favoring his injured side, but projecting absolute authority. She makes a valid point. Alpha, the eldest council member said warningly. You cannot defend. I can defend whoever I want, Kieran interrupted. But in this case, I'm not defending.
I'm admitting fault.
He descended from the dais slowly, each step deliberate. Lyra Reeves is right. I claimed her without her consent. I announced our mating bond publicly before having a private conversation about whether she wanted it. I prioritized pack tradition over her autonomy because that's what alphas do. We take what we want and assume everyone else will fall in line. He reached the center of the hall, standing beside Lyra but not touching. That stops now. Alpha, the silver-haired woman said carefully. What exactly are you proposing? I'm proposing we stop pretending pack law is infallible and start acknowledging where it fails our members. Kieran's gaze swept the assembled wolves. Lyra isn't the first wolf to run from an unwanted mating bond. She's just the first one who survived long enough to make us confront it. How many others have we lost because they preferred exile or death over staying in a situation they couldn't escape? Uncomfortable silence answered him. The old ways worked when packs were at war and survival meant strict hierarchy, Kieran continued. But we're not at war. We're living in the modern world, trying to maintain ancient traditions that don't serve us anymore. And if we can't evolve, we'll die, slowly, as our young people leave for cities where they can make their own choices, or quickly, when someone finally gets tired of tyranny disguised as tradition. This is heresy, one of the council members hissed. This is reality, Kieran corrected. And you can either accept it, or you can try to remove me as alpha. Your choice. The challenge hung in the air, not quite a dare, but close. Removing an alpha required a 2/3 vote from the council plus a majority vote from the pack. It was rare, messy, and usually ended in violence. Nobody moved. I thought so, Kieran said quietly. He turned to Lyra, and when he spoke again, his voice was soft enough that only she could hear clearly. I'm going to ask you a question now. In front of everyone, with no pressure, no alpha compulsion, no expectations. And whatever you answer, I'll accept it. Understand? Lyra's heart hammered against her ribs. I understand. Kieran took a breath, and she realized with shock that he was nervous. Actually, genuinely nervous. Probably the first time in his life he'd asked for something without the safety net of knowing the answer. Lyra Reeves, he said, loud enough for the hall to hear. Would you be willing to stay in pack territory, under your own free will, and give me a chance to earn your trust? Not as your alpha, not through pack law or tradition, but as someone who wants to know if we could build something real together. It wasn't a declaration of love. Wasn't even a promise of a relationship. It was just a genuine question. The thing she'd wanted from the beginning. What would that look like? Lyra asked. Specifically. Specifically? A ghost of a smile touched Kieran's lips. You'd have your own quarters. Your own schedule. Freedom to come and go from pack territory as you pleased. I'd court you, actually court you, like we're living in a century where women have agency and you could accept or reject those overtures without consequences. And if, after a reasonable time, you decide I'm not worth your time, You can leave. No pursuit, no reclamation, no pack law violations. Just clean break. How long is reasonable? How long do you need? Lyra considered. 6 months. Done, Kieran said immediately. Then to the council. You heard the terms. Lyra Reeves stays as a free member of the pack for 6 months. During that time, she's under my personal protection but not bound to me in any way. At the end of 6 months, she chooses stay or go. Either way, no penalties, no pack law violations, clean slate. This is unprecedented, the eldest council member said. Good, Kieran replied. Precedent is overrated. The council convened in whispered discussion. The assembled pack shifted restlessly, probably trying to figure out how they felt about their alpha essentially overturning centuries of tradition for one woman who'd tried to run away. Finally, the council reached consensus. The alpha's proposal is acceptable, the silver-haired woman said, though she looked like the words tasted bitter. Provided Lyra Reeves agrees to abide by general pack law during her trial period. No unauthorized violence, no violation of territorial boundaries without notice, no. Basic rules that apply to everyone. Lyra interrupted. I can manage that. Then we have an agreement. The woman's expression remained cold. But know this, girl, the pack will be watching. One misstep, and we'll have grounds to revisit this arrangement. I'd expect nothing less, Lyra said sweetly, earning a few surprised chuckles from the younger pack members. The tribunal was officially dismissed. Pack members began filing out, their conversations a buzz of speculation and gossip that would probably fuel drama for weeks. Lyra's mother appeared at her elbow almost immediately, pulling her into a quick, fierce hug. You did it, she whispered. I'm so proud of you. I didn't do anything. Kieran backed your play, her mother corrected. But you stood your ground first. That's what mattered. She pulled back, eyes bright. 6 months isn't long, sweetheart. Use them wisely. After she left, Lyra found herself alone with Kieran in the rapidly emptying hall. He was leaning against one of the support pillars, trying to make it look casual, but clearly taking weight off his injured side. That was risky, Lyra said. Challenging the council, changing pack law, all of it. Worth it, Kieran replied simply. You don't know that yet. I might leave in 6 months. You might, he agreed. But at least it'll be your choice. He pushed off the pillar with visible effort. Come on. I'll walk you back to your quarters. You mean my new quarters? The ones I actually get to choose. Exactly those ones. His smile was crooked, tired, but genuine. Fair warning, the bachelor accommodations in pack housing are pretty grim. You might want to redecorate. They walked in comfortable silence through the compound, nodding to pack members they passed. Some looked friendly, some hostile, most just confused, probably trying to reconcile the image of their iron-fisted alpha with the man currently limping beside a woman he'd publicly admitted to wronging. When they reached the residential wing, Kieran stopped at a door about halfway down the hall. This one's available. 2 rooms, decent view, close to the archives if you want to go back to work there. But if you want something different. It's perfect, Lyra said, surprising herself with how much she meant it. Kieran handed her a key, actual metal key, old-fashioned and solid. It's yours. Only copy. Not even I can get in without your permission. The symbolism wasn't lost on her. So, Lyra said, slipping the key into her pocket. This is where you start courting me like we're in a century where women have agency? Eventually. Right now, this is where I go back to medical and let them yell at me for leaving before I was cleared. Kieran grimaced. Apparently, major surgery requires more than 3 days of recovery. Who knew? Everyone. Everyone knew. Well, I'm an alpha. We're not known for our patience. He started to turn away, then paused. Lyra? Thank you. For saving my life, for coming back, for giving me a chance to be better than what I was. I know I don't deserve it, but… Stop, Lyra interrupted. No apologies, remember? We're starting fresh. Blank slate. Blank slate, Kieran agreed. His smile was soft, hopeful, And so unlike the commanding alpha she'd first met that Lyra felt something shift in her chest. "I'll see you around, Lyra Reeves." "See you around, Kieran Thorne." She watched him walk away, still limping, still in pain, but somehow lighter than he'd been before. Then she unlocked her door and stepped into her new space, empty, quiet, and entirely her own. For the first time in her life, Lyra Reeves was free. Not because she'd run far enough or fast enough, but because someone had finally given her permission to be exactly who she was. The future was uncertain. 6 months was both forever and no time at all. She might leave, might stay, might discover that she and Kieran were completely incompatible outside of life-or-death situations. But that was a problem for tomorrow. Today, she was alive, autonomous, and standing in her own space, making her own choices. It was enough. The end. If you found yourself in Lyra's position, would you have chosen to run like she did, or would you have fought to change the system from within? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Would you have run, stayed, or found another path entirely?
Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's crazier and more intriguing as you can ever imagine. So do check it out.